Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. On the show today, I have Judith Hanson Lasater, who is back on the show after a couple of years. Now, Judith is one of those teachers who needs absolutely no introduction. To me, she is just a legend, a living legend in the yoga world. She is one of the teachers that I look up to so much, and I wish I can be more like her in so many ways. I have always enjoyed having conversations with Judith, studying with her, learning from her. And if you have been a long-time listener of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast, you know we've done a couple of episodes and conversations with Judith before. I will link all those episodes in the description of this podcast. So make sure you go check that out after you finish listening to this one. On the show today, we talk about Judith's 53 years of teaching yoga. I can't think of another person living today who has been teaching yoga for that long. And I am so glad that she was here just to talk a little about what those 53 years of teaching has been like, what her biggest takeaways are. And I can really listen to Judith speak for hours on end. So if you are a new or an experienced yoga teacher, I think you will find so much value from all that Judith has put out in this world. So if you enjoy this episode, please remember to rate and review it and to share it with at least one other yoga student so we can continue to share this type of yoga amongst all of us. And one last update before I hand off to the conversation with Judith. My sequencing masterclass is happening on November 22nd. The link to sign up goes out in my newsletter, and this is the last time you can sign up for it. The newsletter is out on November 2nd. So please make sure you go to the link in the podcast description and get signed up. That's all from me. I will see you next week with another conversation. But until then, here's Judith Hanson Lasater talking about 53 years of yoga. Hi, Judith. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast.
Thank you so much. And hello to everyone.
Would you like to get us started?
Yes, I always like to start all my yoga classes or any talks or interviews I do about yoga with the most important thing, which is a minute of nothing. And what I'm going to do is ring my bells, and we'll just sit, if it's safe for you where you are, not when you're driving, and probably close your eyes and we'll just sit for a minute and settle down and in and back. Get to let go of what we were doing and to stop thinking about what's next and to settle in to the present moment and really listen. So let me ring my bells. Again, I'll ring the bells once, they'll be quiet, and then I'll ring the bells again.
I think I should start all my podcast episodes like this.
It shifts, it only takes a moment to shift consciousness. It doesn't take years. It just takes a moment.
So you have just, I'm going to say, completed 53 years of teaching. And to me, that's just incredible. And I want to honor it and celebrate your contribution to this yoga world, this yoga industry, if I can call it that, and the thousands of lives that you have been enhancing in your lifetime. So I've been all morning, I was like, where do I start? I mean, 53 years, where do we begin? So maybe I will start with a naive question of how has your teaching evolved from 5 decades ago to now?
That's pretty much a book.
My last question is asking you if you're writing a book encapsulating your 50 plus years of teaching. That's like my final question here. And I want to throw in a suggestion if you have not thought of it, because I think yoga teachers, students, we need to hear from people like you. And you have such a rich perspective. Anyway, I don't want to drone on. I will save that for later.
So ask me your question again.
How has your teaching evolved in the past 5 decades?
Well, it's evolved because I've continued, for several reasons. It has changed because I continue to study. And I like to say to all the teachers out there, this is a thought, this is an idea that I hold quite dear to my heart, that we should never forget that we are students who teach. So I've never stopped learning. I take occasional courses for people who've graduated PT school. I keep reading. I keep expanding my knowledge, which is part of teaching. It's not all of teaching. So that is definitely deepened and widened. I've had life experiences like getting married, having children, raising them, now having 10 grandchildren, 8 boys and 2 girls, traveled 3 times to India, taught yoga on every continent, taught yoga in classes where there wasn't a translator. We had to figure it out. From Japan, well, I've had translators, but I've taught in China, Japan, Russia, South America, Europe. And it's just the passage of time has burnished me. Do you know that word burnished?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Burnished is like when you have some very precious silverware for formal eating and you use it over time and it just kind of takes on a little bit of a glow, or you have a table that's old and you keep polishing it and it just takes off all the sharp edges and helps the warmness of the color of the wood come out. That's burnishing. It's taking off the hard edges. Or you go to a temple where you see if there's a stone step, there's a little dent where people over hundreds of years has stepped and sort of worn it down. It's kind of been burnished. So time has burnished me. And what has happened, how that has happened, is I have come to understand that practicing and teaching yoga is not just part of my life. My life and my yoga have merged. So that, in fact, these days I'm very interested in teaching Living Your Yoga. I have a book with that title. But yoga is not something I do. It's something I am a little bit more. And so that's been a gradual thing. Of course, when I was younger, it was my asana practice was more athletic, more emphasis on that. And I still practice every day. And I stand on my head in lotus pose, 77 and a half years of age. I do my practice, but I don't see my practice ending when I step off my mat. I see my practice beginning when I step off my mat. Am I kind? Am I present?
You were talking about how you traveled and you taught in different continents and you were first and foremost a student always. Did it ever feel like it was too much? Because sometimes I hear yoga teachers talking about burnout and being tired. And did you ever feel like it was too much? Because sometimes I feel nowadays with this digital world that we live in, and so much is coming in at us all the time. So I feel like we fatigue ourselves a lot more. Did you ever have moments where you were like, I want to give up, this is too much?
Not that strongly, but when I was in my middle years of teaching, I started taking August off and not teaching at all, saving my money and just not teaching. And for the last large part of my teaching, I was teaching 4 classes a week, 2 on Wednesday night and 2 on Friday, and then once a month a workshop. So I've talked to yoga teachers that when I first started, I was teaching 20 classes a week, but I was in my 20s, so I knew nothing. And I think that, and we didn't have internet. You know, we didn't have all those things that draw us away. Life was slower, you know, and it took time to do more things. We didn't expect, you know, when you call a helpline sometimes and they'll say, I need to check on something. And they can be gone for 45 seconds. And they always come back, sorry to keep you waiting for so long. I always start laughing. I almost want to say, it's okay, I was just doing a little pranayama while you were gone. So there's a speeded up time frame. And I think yoga teachers now have a different perspective with the internet. And that changes because a lot of people teach on the internet now. So not so much for me. Then I started taking 2 months off in the summer. I think we all as teachers, you know, in regular school, like high school, there's 9 months and then there's 3 months off. I'm sure they're planning and thinking about their work, but they're having time. The other thing I'd like to say about that is my experience is that most yoga teachers are introverts, which sounds odd because we're in a very people, you know, yoga has traditionally been taught and ultimately is taught teacher to student, you know, one-on-one, like that's how we do it, person by person. And I'm an introvert, even though I seem like an extrovert because I love people and I don't mind getting up in front and talking. But here's how I understand introversion to be. Introverts get replenished by being by themselves. So I was married to an extrovert, and I'd teach my 2 Wednesday night classes, my 2 Friday morning classes done at 1:00, and it would be Friday, and I would be tired, you know. And he was is an extrovert, and he would come on, let's have a party. And I'm like, no, I want to go and be in my yoga room. So I think we need to recognize that for many of us, we're not taking time to just literally close the door and be alone. Have you ever felt that when the people you live with, the family you live with, I don't know your situation, but you just want to go in your room and just like close the door and go,
oh, 100%.
I know. So that's why it's easier for yoga teachers to get burned out. It is the workload. It is taking care of other people's needs, but not allowing enough time for introspection for us to take care of our own needs. As I used to say, just lie on the floor and stare at the ceiling. No, like just being by yourself is like someone is pouring a cool balm over you, over your sunburn. It's like a soothing, like aloe vera, just putting aloe vera on your sunburn. That's what people need more of. We need that in a general sense, but we also need it in a specific sense, a 20-minute Shavasana. A 20-minute Shavasana is a gift that you give yourself and the world at the same time. Because after you've done that, there's more space for compassion to arise in you, both for yourself and for everyone around you.
I have studied restorative yoga with you a few years ago. And my whole perspective about deep rest changed after that. And this was at least it was during the pandemic, I think, or 5-6 years ago. I don't remember. It was online. And it really changed perspective. I always thought I rested, but I was not resting. So then when you said 20 minutes.
You were planning.
Oh, I'm sure something was going on. But when you said it's a gift you give yourself and the world, it's so potent.
Yes, it is. Because no one, well, let me say it this way. Everyone acts out of their level of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to know what someone's level of consciousness in, how do they act? Now, this is not something for your ego to get all impressed about. So watch that. But you look around in the world and you look how people act and what they say and what they're telling you their level of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we are going to bring a drop of peace in our lives and to the people we teach and the people we live with and everyone we come in contact with can benefit from our consciousness being more brightly shining. Mm-hmm. And this is something that is part of our responsibility, not to pretend to be good, to choose to be good, mm-hmm. choose to take care of ourselves. So that generates empathy and compassion for other people. And the world doesn't need another great dog pose. It needs people who live in the present with empathy and compassion as much as we are humanly able to do. So I like to say that being present is not the end of spiritual practice. It is the beginning. Mm-hmm. Present moment is the container of consciousness. That's where we find it. And that's what we're really teaching people. It's not Trikonasana. Mm-hmm. That's the technique. Asana, pranayama, pratyahara, all those other practices that are associated with yoga, they're not the yoga. They point to the yoga. Mm-hmm. Yoga is a state of being. Mm-hmm. And you can't do yoga. You could only be yoga. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I could keep listening to you talk for a very long time. So if I understand correctly, you're saying when you practice or live your practice, your compassion goes up, your empathy goes up. All those qualities are enhanced. They're already within you and they are enhanced and they're brought to surface more effortlessly.
Yes. The main thing to do all day long for the rest of your life is to notice the spinning mind. Mm-hmm. And when we create that distance, that observation of the spinning mind without judgment, mm-hmm. there's a space for wisdom to arise. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I like how you call it the spinning mind, because I always refer to it as the monkey mind. But the spinning mind, I feel, is apt. And the mind spins and then we spin out of control, but I'm speaking for myself.
You know what? It's like we don't have thoughts, spinning thoughts. Thoughts mm-hmm. happen to us. And we get caught up in them. It's not, I'm not talking about, I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about creative thought, which has a completely different feeling, which arises out of presence and on some level. The creative artist, the creative writer, when you create, when you write, when mm-hmm. you do that sort of thing, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the spinning, judging mind. Mm-hmm. Like try getting in an elevator without judging someone. Mm. Oh, that perfume is so strong. Oh, that person smokes. I can smell it. This is gross. This elevator is too slow. It's too crowded. I can't wait to get off. This is terrible. The spinning mind. Mm-hmm. Just as and apparently my favorite mantra is what's next, because that's what I think about. I wake up, what's next? What's for dinner? What am I doing? I have to go look at my book. Oh, yes, I have an interview mm-hmm. today. And that's where we get stuck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't think of you as somebody who thinks what's next. I think of you as someone who's so well placed in life. And I always wonder to myself, Judith, do you ever get angry? Like, do you ever have moments where, no, maybe I should ask Lizzie this, but I always think of you as so calm,
Let's leave
so
Lizzie,
peaceful.
my daughter, out of it. Yes. All right. So I have this necklace, speaking of said daughter. Can you see this necklace?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I got this image of the ascent descent, I call it. And she made this necklace for me.
Mm-hmm.
This part of the necklace. We are, let me show it to you again. See the vertical line?
Mm-hmm.
That's our spiritual part. And then you see the horizontal line?
Mm-hmm.
That's our human part.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are humans, but we're human beings. So we're doers and we're beers. And where those two lines meet,
Mm-hmm.
that's where we live.
Mm-hmm.
With one foot here and one foot.
You said something. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to further answer your question. So we don't want to deny our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Flagellates in the Middle Ages in Northern Europe corresponded with a time in India where there was a lot of what is it called? The men who wander around with a dhoti and the bowl and the sannyasis.
Sannyasis? Okay.
Yes, sannyasis. And there was a lot of the same kind of thing where they would hold their arm up until it withered.
Mm-hmm. The tapaswins, yeah.
To say, yeah, I'm not attached to my body. Well, I tried. Have you ever tried holding your arm over your head?
Not more than a minute.
It hurts.
Yes, absolutely.
It really hurts. So that to me is not honoring the human. But then there's some of us as humans who don't honor the sacred part of ourselves. So that's what we're trying to do, is to integrate our shimmering universal conscious self with the taking the form of this body. But we need to honor both. We need to honor. So I'm in this world, and I have, with all my years of practice, it has definitely changed. So I will have what I call a ruffle. A ruffle, like, I was just about to park there and that car took it. But what has happened is the space between the ruffle and the noticing and letting go. So I'll give you a perfect example. I have a bracelet on that's from India, a woven bracelet that I really like. And we were staying at an Airbnb. I was recently teaching out of state. And I noticed it wasn't on my arm. And I looked in all the places, like my little portable jewelry thing, everything, couldn't find it. So what was so interesting to me was I felt the ruffle, but then it was like ruffle, gone. It was really fast because I thought, it's a bracelet. So there was a tiny little space between that. So that's what I'm telling you about. I get irritated, impatient, and angry, but I catch it faster, and sometimes really fast, sometimes longer. But of course I feel angry, and I don't know if I would say that it's a good thing never to be angry. There are things we need to be angry about. It's what we choose to do with that anger that is the most important thing. Not that we have human ruffles. Like, I can feel angry about child abuse and racism and sexism and all those things that are in the human world. But what do I choose to do with it? Do I choose to stir it up and use it as a weapon against myself and others? Or do I look at it, see the humanity, how human of me, want this to be different? And then what do I do with that? Do I give my money to certain organizations? Do I volunteer? How do I deal with that? in the healthiest way. But I don't try to not be angry.
So you feel it and then you let
I
it go.
feel a wave of anger, but less all the time because I'm old.
I would love to be old like you. Just saying. I look at your journey and I remind myself to be a little more like Judith every now and then. Especially that one line you just said it. It was playing in my head when you were talking. Was how human of me. I learned that from you in the course that I did with you, your restorative training, and I have caught myself in difficult moments, softening with that line. That how human of me. And sometimes more than me, how human of someone else.
Yes.
And I think more on others. And it softens something. So,
you know what it is for me, it stimulates empathy. And my definition of empathy is understanding independent of agreement. Understanding independent of agreement. So we can understand why someone would use heroin because they're in a lot of pain and they're trying to get rid of that pain, but we don't agree with the strategy. And even yoga students, every yoga student comes because they recognize suffering. They have a lower back or they can't sleep or they just feel like life doesn't have, there's something going on in them that brings them to the yoga mat. I had beginnings of arthritis. That's what brought me. I didn't want to learn. I thought maybe this yoga will help me for some reason. And so that's why I came. But I'm going to turn the tables on you and ask you a question. What brought you to yoga? Was it something difficult in your life or your body or?
No, I was at a point where, I was 24 years old when I did my first asana class in a yoga studio. And I grew up in India. I've lived in Seattle only for the past 13 years. And I had elements of living yoga sprinkled into life and growing up culturally. But I never went to asana class. And I have a background of being a Bollywood dance choreographer, instructor, and I worked with...
I have a background in dance.
Yeah. And so I worked with a professional dance company for a very long time. And I was left with a lot of injuries. And I was in my early 20s, 24 in my first asana class. So I had an Achilles tendon injury where I was limping.
That's what brought you. You had suffering.
Yeah. And that's where I ended up in my first yoga class with one leg up in down dog because it was hurting so much. But I remember when I was limping back home after my first asana class, you've been to India, right? The noise, the traffic, it's way worse now, but the trees were greener. And there was space between my thoughts over time. So that's what brought me to yoga.
That's what brought you was the suffering. So that was the gift. I had arthritis. That was the gift. I blessed God that I had, thank God that I had arthritis for a while because that's what brought me.
So speaking of humans, right, and a very human experience, I think teaching is a very human, vulnerable experience. And what are some of the qualities that you would look for in a yoga teacher? Or we should develop as yoga teachers?
Okay. Well, I've written a book, Teaching Yoga with Intention. So I think first, develop your own practice. Because you teach from your practice. That's what you teach. When you go to a yoga class, you are doing the teacher's practice. So this is what keeps you fresh. This is what keeps you going through ups and downs in your life, is to just retreat to the mat. And the mat is a refuge, not because it's a location. It's a choice. Refuge is a choice that you can take at any moment, regardless. You can be in the middle of the Kumbh Mela in India, and you can take refuge in the true self. So the mat is our first refuge when we practice. So be clear of what your intention is. Be clear as a teacher of what your ethics are. Like, most people want to know when they're studying to teach is like, what the question is, what am I going to teach? And I said, that's not the first question. The first question is, what is going to be my relationship with my students? And where are the boundaries and where are the ethics and what is it I'm doing? Because this is a sacred practice. Mm-hmm. Did I tell you the story of the first class I ever taught?
No. Yes, absolutely. I would love to hear it.
Do you see behind me on the wall that rug?
Yes.
That's a cheap rug I got in 1970. Or 71, early on. That was my yoga mat. And
that was your yoga mat?
That's what I sat on when I taught my first class in July of 1971. And I have it hanging up on the wall. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting on that inexpensive cotton blanket. Mm-hmm. Machine is not fancy or anything. Mm-hmm. So I go into I was teaching yoga. I was practicing yoga for 10 months. My teacher left, moved away, and said, would you like to take over this 200-person yoga program? And I said, I was in my 20s. So, I said, sure, I'll do it. You can do anything when you're in your 20s, or at least you think you can. So I went the first day and I sat down on the mat and I had no teacher training. I'd read a lot, practiced a lot. I liked the philosophy. I liked everything. Just discovering yoga for me was like, I'm home. Like the Sanskrit, the teachings, the philosophical part, everything just was like clicked in. Mm-hmm. So I sat down on that mat and I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? What have I done? I had no class plan. Mm-hmm. I literally don't know how I did that. And so I just sat down and thought, well, maybe I could sneak out because they were all lying down resting. And so I thought, okay, what have I been taught to do? So I sat with more awareness and I took a few breaths and I got this feeling of my teacher. It wasn't just a thought. It was in interoception kind of sensing. I almost turned around because it was so strong that she was there. And behind her was her teacher, who was an Indian. And it just went back into infinity, that line. And they were handing forward a bucket of water. Well, I'm a water sign, so maybe that's why I chose that image in my unconscious. But they were handing water in a bucket forward to me. And in a blinding flash of the obvious, I realized, I'm the bucket. I'm not the water.
Wow.
And it gives me chills. Every time I tell that story, it just gives me those chills up and down your back. Because I took from that it's not me. Mm-hmm. It was like an initiation. I'm now part of this lineage, this sacred lineage. And I want to hand the lineage forward. I don't want to put myself forward. I'm the bucket, not the water. And so we need something to remind ourselves that we are the vessel through which yoga flows. Like a radio is the instrument, or the violin is the instrument from which the music comes. Mm-hmm. You're not the music. You're not the water. You're not the teaching. Mm-hmm. And I think every yoga teacher who practices and teaches for a while has these moments in teaching where you open your mouth and something comes out that you never had consciously thought. Mm-hmm. I call it plugging into the cosmic grid. And that's when people want to write something down. They run for the notebooks. Mm-hmm. And what I tell them, I say, do you know why you want to write that down? Because you already know it. You're not learning it from me. You're recognizing it in yourself. And that's why you want to write it down. Okay. So that's an example of being the bucket, not the water. Mm-hmm. And so that changes the way I treat my students, why I ask before I touch them, why I create an environment in which I hope people feel encouraged to try something new, but not pushed to do that. I encourage them to pay more attention to their own wisdom and never do anything that they feel is wrong for them to do, and ask for help and create an environment in which people feel safe. I say, I'm going to challenge your mind. I may very well challenge how you think about yourself or about the pose, but I'm not going to push you physically beyond your limits. I'm going to do this. I want to entice you into the pose. But I'm going to challenge you the way you think about the pose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wrote down one word when you were talking, and that was reverence. And there is this quality that I hear when you speak. It's just reverence for yoga, reverence for this life that we have been given, reverence for the teachings, and that bucket and water. I mean, I know I'll be thinking about it for a long time, many days to come. One of my teachers, when I lived in India, had said in our graduation speech from a course that he just had one piece of advice for us. And he said, follow the yoga, not the person. And I've held that really close over the years. And your bucket and water and that image of, everyone behind you reminded me of that. And something I think that I wish we had, or at least I had more of, was just this honoring that sacredness and that reverence, and a lot more, because I think that's such a deep anchor. Anyway, there's no question here, but just that quality of reverence that I hear from you.
I have deep reverence for what has unfolded in my life. And this may sound strange, but not just for the quote unquote good things. Mm. But as I get older and practice more, even the hard things, the losses, I can see now a little bit that without them, I would not be sitting here today. That everything was pointing me towards this moment and you towards this moment. Mm. All the people that hear our words to this moment. And it is a mystery, the great mystery. I was a graduate student at the University of Texas, and I was walking along that street, by all universities where there's the coffee shops and the bookstores. So walking along there, and I had been a teaching assistant in graduate school. I wanted to teach, but the students just wanted to get an A or a B, and that's all they cared about. And I was disillusioned with that. I was in my 20s. And I just was walking along, and there was a YWYMCA, which was for students. And I was walking, and I promise you, it was like something in my belly that just pulled me and turned, and I walked in. I call it the most important right-hand turn in my life. And I walked up to the counter and I said, I'm looking for a part-time job, because you could live on a part-time job in those days. Gas was 30 cents a gallon. So I walked up to the counter and I said, I'm looking for a part-time job starting in the fall. I think this was like April. And there was a couple people there, and they just stopped what they were doing. And they looked at me and they said, how did you know? And I said, know what? We just got out of a meeting and decided we needed a part-time worker. Mm-hmm. So at that place, I met my husband-to-be and got my kids and learned yoga all at the Y. Because then they had this program I could take. They had a yoga program they just started, and they said you can take the classes free because you're staff. Mm-hmm. So that one right-hand turn brought me into yoga, brought me to the man who gave me these 3 incredible human beings, Lizzie being one of them, my daughter. So everything that's happened has brought us to this moment. And when we can really take that in, there is a spontaneous flowing of gratitude.
Speaking of the Y, when I moved here, my first teaching job was at the YMCA.
The YMCA has done so much for yoga everywhere.
And it was my first introduction in many ways to American yoga and asana was at the Y. And it had such a wide variety of ages and people from different backgrounds. And it was a very warm, safe, supportive space for me to jump into. So just when you said why, I also ended up making some sort of turn that took me there. So I have one more question for you. I have many more questions, but I will.
One more question is good.
I will ask you one more. What do you think that when I say we, I'm referring to yoga students, yoga teachers, the modern yoga world. Mm-hmm. What do you wish we did more of?
Shavasana.
Okay.
That's a flip answer. I have a deeper answer, but allowing the experience of silence and stillness. We are closest to our higher selves, our true nature, when we are still. And that doesn't just mean still in a meditation position, still. It means mentally still. We are the closest to God, to spirit, to however you want to say that. To Krishna, to Buddha, we are at our true self. And we are at the same time human and absolutely exhausted from the world situation, the turmoil that's in the world right now. And there's always been turmoil, but there's never been this thing in your hand where that turmoil was constantly in your face. We are not stressed out. We're beyond stressed out. We are exhausted. And to take 20 minutes a day, if possible, we have the great privilege to do this, and many people don't have the privilege. They have to work every second. But for many of us, especially if we're teaching, we need to rest deeply. Because when we do, everything changes. And when we teach from that space, we don't just teach people asana. I'm going to make a bold statement. We change their life. It is a wonderful dharma to have and a great responsibility. But I just don't know what else to do with my life now. This is my dharma. This is what I was here to do.
Oh, I believe very strongly that you are living your dharma. I have a suggestion for something for you to do in your days ahead. And maybe that is to write that book encapsulating all your learnings or teachings for us from the past 50 years.
That sounds like a big project. I do have a book called Teaching Yoga with Intention. Which
I have read that. I have read that.
Read the very last 2 pages of the book, the epilogue.
I read it a few years ago. I'm going to revisit it.
Read it again. Mm-hmm. It's a page and a half.
Okay.
And it ends with this, it talks about students, how students will come and students will go. Mm-hmm. Greet them and let them go. These are not your students. I try not to say my students. These are the students of yoga who've gotten what they needed from you and leave. They come, they take one class, you never see them. Some come and stay for 45 years. Mm-hmm. And don't forget that your yoga mat is always there, unfurled at the center of your heart, waiting for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Judith. Every time I get to talk to you, my heart is so full. And I know I am thanking you, not just from me, but for all the teachers who grow every time they learn from you or hear from you. Your 50 years will last probably the next 500 years and more in the yoga world. And I know you still have a lot to give to this yoga world. So I'm excited to see what you have next. Thank you so much.
I want to say thank you personally for specifically the way you conduct your questions and your interview and the warmth and energy that comes across so clearly, and for all that you do to promote the practice and understanding of yoga, all the acts seen and unseen that you give from your heart. You are changing the world.
Thank you.
Shavasana by Shavasana. Your own teaching others, teaching them to trust themselves, to love themselves, to forgive themselves, to be themselves. So thank you for the privilege of this time with you.
Thank you.
Sending love across the magic airways of Zoom.
Oh, thank you so much. It is wonderful to see you.
Namaste. May we live like the lotus at home in the muddy water.
Namaste.
Namaste.